Hi, I'm Ed Jaffe, and welcome back to JaffeWoodwinds.com. Today we actually start our fourth season of video interviews, and I'm really pleased and honored to have someone who's been a mentor, a colleague of mine, and someone who I've had great admiration for, not only as a flutist, but also as a conductor, composer, an arranger, an educator, what we call the total musician. He's been prevalent on the New York scene, both as a flutist and a conductor for many, many, many years now, and it's a real pleasure to have Paul Dunkel with us today. Paul, thank you.
Thank you
for spending your Sunday with us today and sharing some of your knowledge with our listeners and viewers. Want to introduce you to those who may not know you. You have a unique position, not only being someone who's been a well-respected and a successful flute player, both as a freelancer and as a principal flutist in many orchestras, but also as someone who has continued the legacy of George Barrère and other Sam Barron, Montour, as well-regarded flutists who've also made the foray into conducting. So I want to explore both of those areas of your career today. But first, let's discuss your flute career and how you began on flute. I know for our listeners this might be interesting that I think your real desire as a youngster was to play saxophone.
It was.
So what happened?
Well, it's actually a pretty funny story now. I didn't think it was all that amusing when it happened to me. My birthday falls in July, when a lot of kids are not with their friends. They're off to camp. They're doing other things. I had the added little item that happened to me. Is that in July, my father was often not at home. He was a scenic designer, an artist, and in the summer months he would go to California, San Francisco, where he was the chief scenic designer for the San Francisco Opera. And so he wasn't around for my birthday, but I would always write him a letter and send it to him, expressing my birthday wishes. Well, around the time, this would have been I have to add my birth date, which is 1943, and I was 8 years old, so it was 1951, actually 19 plus 2, because I've been playing the piano for 2 years, and I didn't like the piano. I was a good pianist, actually, if I do say so myself, but I didn't like it, mostly because my teacher was a horror. So I wanted to get rid of the piano, and I wanted to play the saxophone. Why did I want to play the saxophone? Well, at that point, the only repertoire that I knew for the saxophone was stuff that I heard on the radio in rock and roll bands.
R&B.
Absolutely. I listen to everything, and I love rock and roll. And I thought, rock and roll, I got to go down this street. This is for me. So I said to my mother, who was from Vienna, real classical type. I said, that's it, I'm out of the piano, I want to play the saxophone. And she said, okay, you can play the saxophone, but on one condition, you have to play the piano. Okay. So I wrote a letter to my father, and I said, please send me a saxophone for my 10th birthday it was. And the next couple of weeks went by, and right around my birthday, a package comes in the mail. It's like a long rectangular package. And what could this be? No idea. I open it up, and it's a flute. A flute? No, not a flute. Not a flute. I want a saxophone. So my father, who was Russian, and who never really did learn how to speak English well, and could barely write it, there were problems in communication in our house with language because of that. And so I said to my mother, I don't think I was rational at that point. I was probably screaming my lungs out. I said, oh, this is a flute. What happened? She says, your father doesn't speak the English is a problem. He probably didn't read it. He took the letter. He went down to a music store, and they showed him a flute, and he went, yes, and that was it. So years later, so I guess this would be This would be 1966. My mother was in the hospital. She was dying. And so she was telling me a lot of things about the family that she'd never told me before. And one of those things had to do with the flute saxophone problem. So she said, "You remember when you got the flute?" I said, "Yeah, I remember." She says, "Well, you know, before you sent the letter, I took it and I crossed out all references to saxophone. And I wrote flute."
Wow.
Wow, exactly. You know, talk about hovering.
Yeah, but you know what? Mother always knows best.
Mother knew. And to continue, can I continue that story?
Yeah.
Eating up tape here. Mother was working then, my mom was working then for a doctor. She was a radiologist, so she did x-rays. And she had a patient, Mr. Schmidt, or Dr. Schmidt. And he was a student of Alban Berg.
Whoa.
And he was teaching in New York, and she asked him, she said, "Do you know maybe you know somebody?" She didn't know anybody in the music business. "You know anybody who teaches the flute?" He says, "As a matter of fact, I have a young composition student, Robert Di Domenica." And I guess Bob then was 26 years old, an old man to me. And I think he'll be wonderful. Well, this man, Bob Di Domenica, became my flute teacher for 7 years, I guess it was, my first 7 years. And he was like a second father to me. We all should have a second father. A good primary father is good, but a good secondary father is even gooder. And that was probably the luckiest day of my life, period of my life, when I got Bob as my flute teacher.
And Bob Di Domenica is someone who has written numerous pieces, but one of them was a piece for, it was a flute sonata, I believe?
Yes.
That you've recorded.
Yeah.
And on one of the albums we'll talk about later on. But wasn't he also a teacher up at New England or conservatory at one
Bob
time?
was, yes. When Gunther Schuller became president of New England Conservatory, he brought in a whole number of people from New York City. I believe tuba player Harvey Phillips went up there, became his assistant. And Bob was there, taught composition, and then became an associate dean. And that, I can't remember who played the piece first. I think it might have been Sam Barron, but it could also have been Julius Baker.
Right, but how fortunate all these, unlikely occurrences just happened. So it's sort of a little bit of fate there, you might say.
Totally, luck plays a big part in every musician's life.
Yeah, and so you started flute with Bob Di Domenica, and an old friend of ours, and one of my old teachers as well, Tom Neifinger, told me Bob Di Domenica was determined to make Paul Dunkel America's greatest flute player. Now, did you ever sense that there was that type of thing going on?
No, and it's the first time I've ever been referenced that way. I've never heard it said that way.
Yeah. Well, Tom had a great deal of respect for you. I think we've talked about this, but Tom's two children, Paul and Julie, Tom told me were named after his two favorite flute players, Julie Baker and Paul Dunkel.
Right, so, and Julie's a girl.
Julie's a girl. But anyway, little aside on that. But so you studied with Bob Di Domenica from an early age, from your beginnings of your flute career. What a fortunate thing to have a wonderful flutist and a musician as your first teacher of an instrument. I mean, that's an invaluable bit of luck and good fortune, I would think.
Totally. Compared to my piano teacher, which was then, I think I had hour lessons at that point, which was an hour lessons of screaming at me and smacking my hands. To Bob, who I'd wait outside our apartment building with a Spalding ball, because he always wanted to have 10 minutes of catch with me.
Yeah.
I mean, what flute player comes and
Yeah.
So waiting for my flute lessons was the highlight of my week. Plus, he knew how to teach, and he was fun.
He was a Harold Bennett student himself,
He
wasn't he?
was, and he was originally a saxophone player.
Really?
Yeah.
So it
he
all
started
comes back to the saxophone.
It's always the saxophone is the foundation of music in America. Who knew?
That's right. That's funny. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, and so you progressed well enough, and then you ended up going to Queens College, studying there. Was Bob still your teacher there?
No, he wasn't. And when I was graduating from high school, it was a high school of music and art back then, which now has been merged into with performing arts into LaGuardia High School. Bob said, "Okay, we're through. That's it. I can't teach you anymore." There's an old joke about that, but not worthy of your show.
Questionable.
Yeah. And Bob says, "You're going to study with. I want you to study with William Kincaid." Now, of course, William Kincaid produced a pretty substantial group of flute players, all of whom play very differently. They don't, is there a Kincaid sound? Perhaps, but as played by Kincaid. But he was able, whether he chose to do it or not, and I'm not sure that he chose to do it. I think it's something that just happened with him. That all these people played differently. I mean, you had Baker, you had Harold Bennett, you had Albert Tipton in Detroit. A lot of people don't know who he was.
Oh.
He was a wonderful flute player. Joe Mariano in Rochester. Whose recording of the Griffiths poem, I think, is still the best recording of that with the Rochester Philharmonic. So anyway, the choices for me back then were to study with Kinkaid at Curtis or go to Temple University, because he was also teaching at Temple. My mother, here she comes.
They're always there.
Here she comes. She didn't want me to go to a conservatory, so I had applied to Rochester, where I could also take academic courses at the university, at Eastman School, and I could take academic courses at Rochester. At Temple University, so I applied to those. I got in, but I really wanted to go to Curtis because that was the place where you wanted to be a flutist and you played in a good orchestra. And that was the place to go. So I filled out my application to Curtis, including whatever, I don't know. I don't even remember if you have to put a tape in there. I think you had to go down there to audition in those days, like you do now. And so I sat waiting for my audition date, and didn't come. So now we're in April. I call up Curtis, get the office in charge of applications, and I said, "My name is Paul Dunkel, and you haven't gotten back to me for my application. Spell your name, blah blah." She says, "Well, we don't have anything on record from you." And something should have lit up right there. It should have lit up. There should have been some recognition on this story.
Yeah.
So I said, "Oh my gosh, what can I do?" She says, "Well, it's too late now. We're way past the deadline." I went to my mother and I said, "Listen, you remember that application that I gave you to send in to Curtis?" Yeah. Your viewers have already figured this out.
Yes.
Yeah. And she says, "Well, you know what? I didn't want you to go to a conservatory. I want you to have a college education, so I never sent it in." What can I tell you?
So you went to Queens, but you still studied with Kinkaid.
I did. And at that year, or maybe the year before, Kinkaid had arranged to get a room at the Wellington Hotel on Broadway in 55th Street.
Yeah.
And he would teach a full day. And
6th Avenue, 55th, right? Sixth.
What did I say?
Yes, Broadway. I think it's 6th Avenue.
7th Avenue. I know my New York geography. Yeah, it's 7th Avenue.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, whatever. It's the
Yeah,
Wellington.
It doesn't matter.
You're at the Wellington.
I'm at the Wellington. I'm too. Doesn't matter. I was too young to drink at the bar.
Right.
And he'd, give us. It was a 50-minute lesson, a 50-minute lesson, to give the next person a chance to get ready and me to get out and him to have like a drink.
Yeah. Sure.
Because he needed a drink. But it was a different experience from Bob. It wasn't, it was a little more, it was rigid. He had his way of teaching. I think every student got kind of the same dose of etudes and warm-ups and repertoire. But I think it was really the structure was very good for me.
Was it geared towards the French conservatory approach? Because he himself was the student of Barrère.
Sure.
And so was that his approach, basically coming out of the French tradition?
I think so. I think he was teaching the way he was taught. I don't believe he was putting, say, that much thought into the teaching process. Look, he was getting the top talent. Top talent was going to him, and some of us were going to come out able to play. I think some of us came out having learned to teach ourselves in a strange sort of way. Now, my next teacher in the job was Sam Barron, because Kinkaid, I think his health was bothering him. After my third year with him was 1963, he decided to stop his teaching in New York and just limit it to Philadelphia. And he said he'd be happy for me to come down to Philadelphia. I was never his favorite pupil, so I knew other people that were studying with him that he really liked, really loved.
You didn't tell him jokes. I mean, that would have been the end of it.
No. We talked occasionally about other things, but
right.
No joking around.
Right.
I think he could be a fun guy, but not in lessons.
Right.
But he was.
Did he play a lot during the lesson?
No.
Really?
No. He did not play a lot in lessons. Now, I don't know whether he played a lot in lessons, in his so-called prime, because this was not his prime anymore. He'd already retired from the Philadelphia Orchestra. Right. He retired from the orchestra in 1960. Not eagerly, I might add. He wanted to continue playing, but Ormandy, who was the music director then, wanted him out, didn't want him there anymore. Ormandy never liked him. He didn't like Ormandy. When you hit 60 years old, that was mandatory,
65?
65? Yeah, 65. It was mandatory retirement age, sorry. Yeah,
right.
65. So I think he was embittered by the experience. So at that point, I had to look for another flute teacher. So the logical person for me to approach at that point was Julius Baker.
Right. Who was also a Kinkaid student.
Absolutely. And Julie always resented the fact that I didn't study with him. And in fact, Bob told me, don't study with Julie. Go to Kinkaid. It was made very clear to me by Bob that I was to go to William Kincaid. So when Kinkaid retired, I said, okay, and I think I asked Bob what I should do. I said, what do you think? He says, okay, now I think you can go to, maybe you didn't think I was mature enough, maybe you didn't think which is probably true. And I was kind of a brat. And
no!
Totally, my reputation precedes me. Yes, I was a brat, and I wasn't afraid to say, what I thought. And I had skipped 2 grades, so I was already young. I wasn't,
So you were quite young then for someone in college.
Yeah, I was, and I think Bob sensed that, and I think he was right. And Julie didn't treat some of the male students all that well. He was partial to his female students, which, and he had some great students. My gosh.
Well, he had sort of inherited Kinkaid's mantle of getting the best talent.
Absolutely. He was now in the flute industry the go-to guy. So I called him up. I don't know if I should tell this story. You know the story?
I don't. If you did, I don't honestly remember it.
Yeah. So I had just finished my junior year in college, and so it was like June of 1963. I called Julie, and I said, my name is Paul Dunkel. We met many years ago. I studied with Bob Di Domenica, and he knew who I was, because the flute student world, the kids who were studying flute in those days, was very, very small. So if you had any kind of talent, the teachers talked with one another. And,
the explosion in flute really happened later in the 60s and the 70s.
Definitely.
As Rampal and then ultimately Galway, then it became...
Absolutely.
And there was obviously, you could have a solo career as a flutist by Rampal's success and then Galway's. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
So I called him up, and he, sort of pretended not to know me, and I mean, why would he know me, So we made an appointment to go to his house. I met him. He lived then on 74th Street and West End Avenue. 9 o'clock appointment. I went. I lived in Queens then because I was going to college. I had a little apartment with a friend of mine, and came a little before 9. Knocked on the door. Nothing. Cricket, cricket, cricket. Tried again. Finally, the door opened up a little bit, and you could see one eye sticking out. And a sleepy eye. And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, Paul Dunkel, I'm here for a lesson." Oh, I'm so sorry. He said, "Listen, I just got up. Could you come back in 5 minutes, and would you mind walking my dog?" Okay, do whatever he wants. At this point, I go out, put my flute inside, walk the dog for. I had no dog walking experience in those days, not like I do now. And so I, walked the dog, and I came back, and we had a lesson, and the lesson consisted a lot of him playing, and finishing off by playing duets, which I always did with Bob. And with Sam Barron. We always played duets at the end of our lessons.
Which is a great thing to do.
Totally.
It's
totally. And because, you can pick up a lot while you're playing, but also you hear how far you are away from where you want to be. Well, with Julie, like I felt I was, a kindergartner going against Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
A 10-round fight.
Yeah. It
was brutal. Okay, I made another lesson in 2 weeks. $15, by the way. For a lesson,
which in those days was not cheap.
It was a fortune. Yeah. I think I bought my first car for like $30. So now I'm into him for half a car. So we make an appointment 2 weeks. Knock on the door. Sleepy eye. Walk the dog. Have another lesson. Not very good. And so. Okay, gosh, this is not going. I felt not good about this whole. 3rd week, not the dog this time. Went in on time. Had a lesson, bad lesson, and I didn't feel I was. I didn't feel I was getting anything. Maybe I was, it's kind of through the process of osmosis. But I wanted something a little more analytical, something more thoughtful.
Right.
I wanted to be taught. This is how you do it, and this is why. So at the end of our lesson, Julie said, "Well, when are you going to come again?" I said, "I don't think can do this anymore." I don't think. Why not? I said, "Look, for $15 an hour, I can buy 5 of your recordings and achieve the same result." He wasn't happy with that.
Probably not if you verbalized it to him like that too.
It was plus the $15. The man cared a lot. He did care a lot about money.
Yeah.
As everybody, anybody who knew Julie, is like money was like the
motivating force.
The force, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so, and our relationship over the years was never that great, which was a shame, but I'll
He didn't like the way you walked his dog.
What did I know from walking dogs, No, but, I feel bad about it because, look, he was the best. He was the greatest player, an orchestral player, was amazing.
When he did play with you, when you did play duets with him, whatnot. What was the experience, the feeling like? I mean, you said it was overwhelming, but was it reminiscent of Kinkaid sound? Because there definitely there's a link in the recordings that you can hear.
Yeah, there is. But it's funny. Julie was like still in his prime. Still sounded wonderful. It was clean. It was when Baker played. It was when you were standing right up close to him. It was kind of rough, and you heard a lot of, other noise,
Yeah.
Very breathy. But I remember though, for some reason, I walked a few feet away from him in that small room in the Wellington, where Kinkaid taught, and suddenly you start as you walk away.
Now, was this Kinkaid sound you're talking about?
Yeah, Kinkaid sound in the Wellington. The further away you got from him, like, oh, so there's that sound. There's that sound. Right. You heard less and less, but up close. It wasn't good.
Right. But Baker's sound up close, was that similar or different than?
No, he sounded good anywhere.
Yeah, so it wasn't. He'd figured out somehow to or it just was
You know,
natural, or whatever?
Yeah, he sounded wonderful up close. Part of it, I guess, was not. Now, I believe that Julius Baker sounded better on recordings with a microphone up close than Kinkaid did, because with the microphone was up close with Kinkaid, you heard some of that stuff. So today, some people will listen to a recording, you know, if you can find them still, which is not so easy, of Kinkaid, and you hear a lot of that extra sound. And people are turned off by that.
Right.
They
But
can't
the
get that
orchestral
sound.
recordings are phenomenal.
Unbelievable, Daphnis, all the big stuff. He was like, you know.
Yeah. And especially in the Academy of Music.
Yeah.
It was just the whole that
Yeah.
lent itself to that type of...
Yeah, but they recorded a lot of those in the basement of the Academy. You know, which I guess I think actually I want to say Stokowski preferred it, the sound down there to record underneath the stage.
Did and then of course you also studied with Sam Barron, who was, you know, such a wonderful person and a wonderful musician. And with all these teachers, were there any specific exercises that you remember that you found, you know, really helpful, or that were, you know, you still remember, or that you might still even practice?
Oh yeah. And strangely enough, it's exercises Bob Di Domenica taught me, which I want to think that he got them maybe from Bennett. I don't know. And he called them finger twisters.
Yes, Bennett had the finger twisters. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I did not know that. I'm glad I, you know, and somebody else must have had them before.
And you gave me, I remember when I studied with you, gave me a sheet. You had a sheet of 2 or 3 pages. I remember there was it was blue ink of those groups of like 4 notes.
4 notes.
Yes,
Yeah,
and all permutations of.
Yeah. You know, like playing up a half step, down a whole step, up a third, down a, you know, but all different combinations, mostly staying within maybe a major third. And I still do those for quick warm-ups.
Could you demonstrate 1 or 2 of them a little bit? Just.
I can't play finger twisters anymore. Well, so if we had, let's say, make a hard one, of course, is C. And slow, no problem, but now you try to repeat that over and over again. Now then you might take that same pattern and start on the second note. So instead of doing well, it's the same notes in the same order, but it feels different.
Right.
So I do those, like, let's say I get into where I'm playing in the pit, the ballet, and the trains or the traffic has been bad, and I'm running into the pit, and
Late.
I got not late.
1 minute before.
That's not late. I'm still on time.
You have it. You have a rep.
I know. I come in. There are some things that you have to do before you get into the pit that are important. We certainly don't want to talk about those here.
Why not?
Well,
we will talk about them later on in a way.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
but all right. But you know, in preparing for, let's say you're playing a difficult solo, or Midsummer Night's Dream or something. You have, in front of you, your type of warm up at some point during the day prior to that.
Well, for example, let's take Midsummer Night's Dream. Like, okay, so the hardest thing, I want to say for all flutists, the hardest thing for Midsummer Night's Dream is trying to do the whole thing not in one breath. Never for me. But in 3 breaths or something like that.
Right.
Okay. So, but in Midsummer Night's Dream, like any other piece of music, not every measure is hard. So I identify in pieces of music and excerpts and sonatas, whatever it is I'm doing that I have to play, those passages that are difficult. And I don't start at the Midsummer Night's Dream and just play it straight through, because one, I'm not worried about my breathing. Okay, if I can't do it in one, that amount of breath, it's too late. So I have that down. But what I am worried about is some of those measures in there that are hard. So I'll come into the pit, and I will just take those measures, those X number of measures, and repeat those measures, or those two measures back to back, or take one of those measures, start it in the middle, and go to the middle of the next measure, and work on it the same way I do finger twisters.
Right.
And that way, you're not always beholden, say, to the bar line.
Right.
You're always playing through the bar line. I find that to be a problem for a lot of practicers who work with bar lines rather than around them. I don't know if I'm making that too clear.
Dealing with the phrase. That's not right.
Sure. You always have to consider that.
Right.
And so, between working with these finger twisters and dividing stuff up, and then there's also mentally, I'm redistributing notes in my mind, or compartmentalizing the notes. So I'm not always thinking of, in a 3/8 measure that is the Midsummer Night's Dream, but I'm thinking of maybe making the 3/8 measure, which would be 2 3/4 measures, playing them like 2 3/4 measures.
I see.
Fooling around with the rhythm a little bit, not altering the rhythm, but just changing a little bit to put stresses in different places.
Right, in order to accomplish it. And that applies to any music where we deal with technical things on any instrument. Yeah. It's a way of mentally, practicing it and mentally getting through something so that it no longer feels as monumental or difficult to achieve. That's good advice. And those finger twisters, various people, Tafano Gobet method has finger twisters. They don't call them that. Certainly the Marcel Moyes books dealing with technical, virtuosity. He has many aspects in his books where he deals with, little 4-note groupings and so forth. So whatever you call them, but they are wonderful to do, and it really gives you a sense of control, technical control on an instrument. I found
we're very lucky as flutists because we have a huge library of etudes and technical books and scale books, and forests have been destroyed. Just building the flutist library.
Yeah. Well, what? This is something I was going to ask later on, but let's do it now. When I started studying with you, you gave me a book for scales early on, and I was as raw as can be. And, this is a belated thanks for taking me as a student. I had a Bundy flute. I had played saxophone, clarinet, so I could, I knew about reading music and that's not. But playing the flute, this was a new thing, and I may have played maybe a year, and you accepted me because I guess I was just so determined to want to study. But and then you took me down and you helped me pick out a Gemeinhardt flute because I step up, but I had so little money. But one of the things you gave me right off the bat, which still today remains my favorite book for practicing scales on the flute, and I've used them on saxophone, is the Marquardt Daily Studies, which was so wonderful, and I know it was something Kinkaid had all the students memorize, if I remember correctly. So in addition to the Marquardt studies, what other scale books do you recommend, and also etude books that would be helpful to any flutist?
Well, I used, of course, I started the Anderson books with Bob, and they continued with Kinkaid, and then the Dijon books? Jean books, yes. Right. It's been a long time since I played those, which I liked, and I liked the more musical etudes better. I felt that I was, I wanted to play music at the same time as etudes.
Right.
Truth be told, I didn't like etudes all that much, So, and Kinkaid was not happy with my etude
preparation.
No, he was like.
Well, what repertoire did he work with you on?
Very traditional. I mean, in those days. I think everybody knew the same stuff, and everybody went through the same stuff. I mean, Bach sonatas, Mozart concertos, and then the usual, the French repertoire, anything, Gobert, and then we'd have some of the anthology books that we'd go through, that had, you know, the great stuff.
Did he
And
work on any contemporary music with you?
he wasn't the contemporary man. I'm trying to think. I mean, you know, in those days, what was considered contemporary? You know, it was still kind of the Stone Age. So I guess we'd say that you know, the Varese was contemporary. Hindemith might have been considered even contemporary in those days. Now, of course, not. You know,
Right.
it's not. But I think now, today, you know, I'm wondering how many of the students are really doing a lot of the, you know, serious contemporary work. Kinkaid was interesting though when he taught like the Bach. Interesting from the sense that I was kind of shocked, because what he did was take the sonatas, he'd take our music at the end of one lesson, and he'd say, okay, next week you're going to bring in the B minor sonata. And I remember this specifically because of the long first movement. And he sat down with a pencil, whatever edition it was we brought in. And there were a few already back then. And he would phrase, put in all the phrasings, he did everything.
Huh.
He put it all in. I was spoon-fed his version of the way the sonata went. And I didn't think much of it. But then in my first year with Sam, let me backtrack. I'd also studied the Bach sonatas with Bob Di Domenica. And I don't remember exactly how we approached the music part of it. But I remember then going to Sam, and then it became more of a thoughtful process where you had to analyze the phrases.
And you would evolve your own version as a
You
result.
would. And you know, when I was actively teaching, I insisted that my students would get an unedited version. So when I went into Sam, lesson with Sam, where he told me to prepare the Bach unaccompanied, the partita. And I played the first movement, and I came in and I just played the first movement as fast as I could, and you know, tried to get to the double bar
On one breath?
on one breath.
Yeah.
You know, after X number of bars, I was like a puddle in front of the music stand. You know, I said, I can't do it. He said, what can't you do? He said, I can't do it. I said, no, you're not that. You're not supposed to do that. That's not what. Then he explained, you know, the phrasing and possibilities of where you can breathe and how you'd make it sound right when you could breathe every measure and still make it sound right. I think it was Harold Bennett used to say, I breathe every 2 measures when I need it or not.
Huh.
You know.
Interesting.
But he made it. You make it sound right, and then
Right.
you always have a full tank of gas. You know,
Right.
you're not struggling.
Right.
We never
Right.
should be put in that position of struggling for the air at the end.
Right.
But
So-
Kinkaid would write everything out.
So you had really different teachers, different
Totally.
styles. But so where did your love for contemporary music, because you throughout your whole career have been a big proponent of contemporary music, even to the point of the 2 orchestras that you helped create, the Westchester Philharmonic and then the American Composers Orchestra, both had strong dedication to playing contemporary composers and their works and premiering them. So where did this love, and you were in Specula Musicae, music, I think Ars Nova.
Contemporary chamber ensemble.
Arthur Weisberg's
Yeah,
contemporary
Arthur Weisberg,
chamber.
sure.
So where did this love for contemporary music really fester?
2 sources. Bob, who was a composer himself, and who, I do sight reading with him all the time in our lessons, and he'd pull something off the piano or the music stand that I'd sight read, something that he was going to be playing himself. I'll get back to that. And the other source was, and here she comes again, Mom.
Really?
Mom grew up in Vienna, going to the Vienna Opera, but she also liked, the Viennese school, the Webern, Schoenberg, Berg.
Really?
Yeah, she was very hip that way. She, very, very she was.
No wonder she didn't like the saxophone. They never wrote anything.
Well,
I shouldn't
not
say
those
that.
guys. Not Baird. And Baird. They all
Weber did.
Sure, and Baird did too.
Yeah.
No, but she was very hip. I know I've maybe portrayed her as kind of the typical hovering mom, but she really was. I don't remember her like that. I remember her trying to make good decisions for me.
But it seems like it did work out in the end. That her decisions were correct for you.
Yeah. Mom sometimes knows best.
Right.
I don't begrudge her.
So
she took me to concerts of contemporary music.
Really?
She took me to the Max Polyakov concerts, which was a series. I think it was called Music in the 20th Century, at the 92nd Street Y, and I heard young composers there. Some of the older guys, and they'd interview them, and I remember hearing and seeing, which was mostly Charles Warren. And he had written a piece for timpani, I think solo timpani piano, and I loved this stuff. I thought it was great. It didn't seem new to my ears. It seemed like it was like music.
Now you started to gig in New York in the 60s, and you had a lot of success. Very early on, you got into the City Ballet. Then you were working with Arthur Weisberg's Contemporary Chamber of Music. You were one of the founders helped create Speculum Music High. Ars Nova Music Attorney. You played principal with Brooklyn Phil, with the American Symphony. You were really happening as a young flute player. And there was a scene that was happening.
Was a scene.
Not only the recording industry, but the freelance, the classical freelance scene. How did that all come? These weren't the days necessarily where everyone auditioned for every gig.
No, you didn't audition. You have to know somebody who was already on the job. Maybe wouldn't even be the contractor, because the contractors didn't know. They would go to their other principal players and, who I need somebody for this instrument, and all my regulars are doing other stuff, and I can't find anybody, and the concert's 3 days away. What am I going to do?
Right.
Well, sometimes the answer was call Paul Dunkel, and it was like, who's he?
Right.
And people would vouch for me,
Right.
Usually,
and how did you? And these people you met just through doing other gigs, and did you ever go to any contractors or any other players and take lessons with them just so they could hear you play? Because that's a common thing today that people do.
I didn't. I didn't. And it is more common today, and I think it's good to do it. Definitely, I think it's good to do it. People have come to me just to perform, and I've used them, and or not,
Right.
But there's so little work now, that I feel bad. People, terrific flute players, will show up on my doorstep, and your heart breaks, because it's not what it was when we were in the business, when there was pretty much enough work for everybody to make a decent living, a good living.
Right.
It's too bad. Frankly, the level of flute playing right now is, I believe it's better than any other instrument. Any other wind instrument. You have more great flute playing.
It's incredible when you hear these young artist competitions, and you go to the flute fairs and you hear young kids playing. 12, 13-year-old kids knocking off the Ibert Concerto, no problem. It's amazing.
No problem.
Yeah, it's astonishing. What used to be considered like a master's level piece of repertoire is now, middle school.
Practically.
Yeah. It's really astonishing.
Now, then the question is, okay, technically they can all play. Everybody can play at this level. Now, what are they going to do with a Bach sonata? Should anybody out there still be interested in hearing a Bach sonata? That's another level entirely, because now that takes you into the musicality and
beyond the surface level.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where the education and the individual passion and the desire to elevate as a musician has to come in. But sometimes just having that first level, the surface level, the technical wizardry is enough to get someone through quite a bit.
Yeah. But I should also say that, when the young people come in and they play something that deserves more of an analysis, it's not their fault that they're doing it. They're not doing it. It's the teacher's fault, because the teachers themselves haven't been experienced or haven't experienced that level of musical intellect.
Right. So I mean, it's sort of the I guess the downside of the popularity of the instrument. More teachers needed, more players there. The instruments are coming out today, at least ergonomically, perhaps more friendly, so kids even can adjust to the flute at an early age. But the problem is, like, you had the good fortune of having great teachers, a specific great teacher right off the bat. And totally. That is so essential. And it was a bit of good luck. I mean, it's total luck for you to have this guy. How many players who start any instrument have that good fortune? And so, it's just happenstance. It's like finding a good doctor. How do you know the guy you're going to is going to be a great doctor for you?
When does patients come out alive? Mostly that's the answer.
Yeah. But it is that way too with the instruments. And talking about the instruments, you are one of the few players that still play a traditional instrument. You play an old PAL flute with a traditional cut head. And of course, today, the vast majority of flutes are Cooperized in some way or influenced by the Cooper innovations of the 1970s and on. You've stayed with the PAL flute. Tell us your opinions, about conventional, traditional flute, head joint cut, and instruments as composed compared to the contemporary.
Yeah, I'm almost sad that you asked me that question because I'm one of the laziest flute guys, probably the laziest flute guy in the world. That I would get a flute in my hands and I'd say, no, it's okay. I didn't go on the Hodge looking for
You didn't
flutes.
go crazy with head joints and...
No, I always felt, well, for example, so my first flute I think was an Artley. And then I went to something a cut above, and then when I went to high school, Bob said, we gotta upgrade you. And at that point, it was when I went into, I still was playing that whatever it was, flute in high school. And then when I got into the senior orchestra at Music and Art, which was a top orchestra, I became first flute at what they called the Orchestra 8. Flute.
Orchestra 8.
It was called Orchestra 8 because that was the senior orchestra. It's called Senior Orchestra, Orchestra 8. That was the best orchestra at Music and Art. Well, we had Orchestra 7, Orchestra 8, Orchestra 7, Orchestra 6, and Orchestra 5. We don't want to talk too much about, Orchestra 5 and Orchestra 6. They were kind of like not so great. But when I became first flute, Bob says, you got to get a better flute now that you're in Orchestra 8. I mean, you're this pinnacle of achievement.
Right.
So I got a closed hole Haines, which, by the way, I still love closed hole Haines flutes.
I have one too, actually, that I play at my show. It's they're easy to play with a beautiful sound,
Absolutely.
Good scale, and I think for young players, especially, and also for doublers, since my site is largely devoted to woodwind doubling, a Haines flute and a closed hole Haines flute, low C, is a fantastic instrument. If you get one that's in good shape and has a good head joint. I mean, obviously the head joint is always the thing, but they are very reasonably priced. I mean, some of the instruments today, I mean, a top level professional flute, you're talking roughly $10,000 today. And especially if you're a doubler and you have all these instruments to purchase, unless you come from a wealthy family, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to go into hock. You're already in hock going to college today. It doesn't make sense to do that. And a Haines flute, which are not necessarily the most popular in this country anymore, as they were certainly in the 40s, 50s, 60s, into the 70s, is a fantastic instrument, and you can get them on eBay secondhand for $3,000, $3,500, sometimes less. they're wonderful instruments. And I just want to put my 2 cents in because I also have an old pal, and I use that for, you know, my practicing and the, you know, other things. But on the gig, on the doubling gig now for the last year or more, actually, I've been using the Haines, and I've been very happy with it. And you know, I just wanted to see there because economics is a big thing today in instrument purchase. And you know, when you're talking about when you got your upgraded to your instrument on orchestrate, do you remember how much it cost you?
$150.
Okay, so inflation, that doesn't match where inflation is. The price of flutes has gone through the roof comparatively. Yeah. So, you know, $10,000 today, $150, you know, how many, 60 years ago, right. Something like that.
And then, so I played that flute all through high school. Then when I went to college, and I was playing, I got into the National Orchestral Association, which was a training orchestra. And all the kids, you know, musicians then, they were either at Juilliard or Manhattan. Some came down from the West Point Army Band, you know, who would come down and play. Good players. And so we would have sectional rehearsals with coaches. And one of the coaches for the flutes, wow, the only coach was Harold Bennett. And I came in with the flute section there, and Harold looked at my flute and said, "Closed hole?" And I said, "Yeah, you know." And he says, No. You got to have an open hole flute. National Orchestral Association, better than Orchestra 8, you know. Yeah. So I went home and I told my mother. I said, "Well, this is the deal. He wants me to get this this flute, you know." And my mother, you know, we didn't have any money. But she says, "Okay, you know, the teacher said you got to get it. You're gonna get it, you know." So I remember I got the Harold Bennett homogenized flute, and then I played that for years and years and years until one day, now many years. So that was 1960. And I'm playing this flute professionally. Figured if Rampal was playing a Haines in those days,
yes,
mine wasn't gold, but okay.
Right.
So I'm home one day. I'm already a homeowner in Westchester. Phone rings, pick it up. Gravelly voice. "This is Paul Dunkel." I said, "Yes, it is." "The flute player?" "Yeah." He says, "I got your name out of the Union book." You know, you know, I'm in the middle of mafia land right now.
Right.
"Really?" He says, yeah. So he tells me that he has a piccolo for sale. Powell piccolo. I said, "Really?" Now this is stolen, written all over it. So doing the right thing, I said, "Oh, I'd love to see it." You know, with the idea that I'm going to find out whose this was and, you know, consult with the authorities. So he agreed to meet me at Flatbush Avenue and the Belt Parkway. The cameraman is laughing. Because that area features a large selection of bodies in cement shoes.
Right.
And so, okay, I got in my car, I drove out there, I met him, he says, "I don't have the flute here." And he was a scruffy fellow with a beard. So I followed his car to his house, and I figured, well, okay, so I'm going to die. You know, it's okay. I've had a good run, you know. 19 years, whatever. No, 39 years still, 29 years, whatever it was. So it turned out that this piccolo belonged to his uncle. So he said, Peter Casso, who had died recently, and he was the executor. So I said, "I'm interested." And I think the piccolo was then, he wanted $2,000 for the silver piccolo, Powell piccolo. Well, I'll have to think about it. So I went home, called up the Haines company. "Yep, this piccolo is made for Peter Casso." Okay. So I bought it from him. But I negotiated the price. I got it for $1,500, which I guess in those days was pretty reasonable for that. I don't know. And he called me a week later. He says, you know, I think there's a flute here that kind of matches the piccolo, this flute here. So I went back to his house. This time I could drive straight to his house, save a little on gas, and and it was this flute, and it had the weird keys on it, you know, like a trigger key for to play a low C sharp in the left hand, and a low B, a low C. Made possible to do all sorts of weird fingerings down there in combination, you know.
Something sometimes you see on the alto flute built for that, so people could play Daphnis or things like that.
But So, and so I said, geez, I really like it. So I think I got then this flute for $2,500, 1976. It's worth a little more now, but I'm, you know. So those were my flutes. You've just heard my whole flute history. I've bought an occasional flute here and there as a backup, just in case, you know, one of them is in the hospital,
right.
and I need a flute at short notice.
Right. So you weren't nuts about equipment, going searching for that, as so many are, you know, and
Nope.
And I must admit I had gone through that for many years. At
But you know,
time.
if flute players have come to me and we're studying me, what should I do about the flute? I would always recommend somebody else, you know, a colleague for them. Talk to this person. They know all about the new flutes. You know about the Japanese flutes. They know the new ones that are made up in Boston.
Right. So I mean, but all the flutes you played were traditional head, basically,
Totally.
and that's the way you. And when you hear most of the flute players that you hear today, younger flute players who are playing mostly newer style flutes, certainly more flutes that are more undercutting on the head than yours. Do you ever have an inkling to want to play those type of flutes, or you know, are you, you know, you come out of the tradition with you know, a Kinkaid type of sound in your ear, you know, so I mean, did you ever have that inkling to want to change or to move in that other direction?
No, I didn't. Part of it was, like I said, I'm kind of lazy that way. Terrible, I admit it. The other thing is that I think that when you start getting a flute that you really feel comfortable with, you wind up doing things the same way, getting the same sound, not working hard enough. This flute, I find you have to work hard on this flute. This is not such an easy flute to play. Like, you know, hey, pals are not easy to play necessarily. You have to, you know, it's like a friend who becomes a great friend, who you know how to work with.
But sometimes the difference between what you feel when you're actually playing the resonance through your body and your head resonance has very little to do with what actually sounds to the objective listener or to the microphone out front. And I always, my little experience with these, I've always found pals sound better listening out front, and the Haines flutes that I've owned, including my alto flute, piccolo, seem to have a more immediate response here. There's something like I'm hearing something closer up that's more appealing, but the pal you sort of have to let, you know, happen and trust it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like that with saxophones too. I know that Selmer saxophones for years, especially the Mark VI, especially, you know, compared to some of the older Selmer horns, cigar cutter, or to an old Kahn or Martin, it's a completely different response, and you have to sort of trust sometimes that the sound will be what you imagined it, because sometimes what you're feeling and you're in a body and the resonance is not actually what's sounding.
Yeah.
You know, but anyway, you know, it's interesting.
What's interesting for me, you know, over the years of playing, you know, with a lot of saxophone players, doublers, mostly it's, you know, I don't play with straight saxophone players a lot. I play, you know, guys who play all the instruments that the doubler is supposed to play. And I always feel that they are listening much more than the guy who just plays one instrument. Part of it, I think, is brought on by the insecurity. I think a lot of doublers feel an insecurity. Oh, I'm playing with the guy who just plays flute, and I got to kick it up a notch, or, you know. So what they do is they are listening like crazy, you know. And so what happens then is they play more in tune. A lot of I've done sessions. These guys play so well in tune. I don't have to work. The old tune, tuned at the factory joke, which is, but doublers don't feel that. They understand that, they're you're just starting when you open the case. Now you got to figure out the foibles of the instrument. Why does this flute have this particular problem? Right. Some instruments have it's generic, or the flute like F sharp for me has always been a tough note to tune with other people. I've always had to make mighty adjustments. I don't know if that's me, but it seems that
the F sharp on the fifth line.
Yeah. And then when it gets up there in the stratosphere, then it's even worse. It is not my favorite note.
Right. Right. But that thing about doublers, actually, Tom Knifinger told me something very similar years ago. He said they know more about harmony because they're playing jazz and so forth, and he felt that was the same thing too. That they were more flexible because of that. I mean, it's hard to generalize.
The other thing, you're right. No, it's absolutely true. The other thing is, as flute players, we're always on the top. We're very rarely playing something internal. On the rare occasion when in an orchestra when the clarinet will be above us or the oboe will be above us, we're the king. Everybody's got to tune to us. And Harold Bennett used to keep. He'd never take his flute apart. He had a flute case that was this long. You know that, right?
Yeah, he had one piece.
Yeah. And it was one piece, and well, first of all, it was homogenized, and he didn't want. We're not going to go there, please.
No, don't do that.
Let's not do it to our kind audience.
Yeah.
But he would keep the flute one piece. And I once asked him, why is that? He said, because where I have it right now is where it's going to be in tune. Of course, not taking into account, the other 11 guys in your woodwind section. Who are like pulling in, pulling out, rolling in, rolling out, doing all kind, using, alternate fingerings to try to play. Flute players, we tend to do it less, Right. But I like to do it a lot. I like to use a lot of alternate fingerings.
Interesting. I've never talked about that with you. For the convenience of the technical and the tuning.
The tuning most.
Uh-huh.
Technical. I think flute players we know about that. About certain fingerings work better, and nobody's going to hear that the sound is less pure or less brilliant while you're playing something fast.
Yeah, especially like Shostakovich symphonies and the Russians are unmitigatingly difficult.
They're all up high, and you gotta fudge the fingerings. But if you do it right, and you got to practice those, you got to really woodshed those. Then the alternate fingering is a great gift.
Right. And there's so many wonderful books. Certainly the historical book, the James Pellerite book for fingerings and possibilities is always wonderful. And online today, you can find a whole listing on various websites of different fingerings to use. And so it's certainly a very accessible thing. Switching gears, how did you come from being a tremendously successful freelance player, and then you had this steady gig with the ballet, and principal in a number of freelance orchestras? How did you make the decision, or why did you make the decision to give a lot of your energies to conducting, certainly starting in the early 80s when you...
it was even before that. It was in the 70s. It was even in the early 70s that I really... decided that I needed to do something else to get a little sanity. And what would bother me that I was playing a lot of concerts with conductors that were, I wouldn't say not prepared. They were prepared all right, but they didn't have a point of view of a piece. They come in and why are we doing this piece with you? I would think to myself, and sometimes I would say out loud.
You mean you would verbalize?
Why are we doing this piece when you have no approach to this piece? Well, are you going to give us something new here? Or are you going to what insight do you have in this? Or is it just, going to be something you heard? And I used to come home at night, and I was married, and I used late at night after the concert, and I used to complain and moan to my wife, another one of these performances, meaningless performances, opportunities missed. And she'd say, well, she says, well then, basically what she said was, I'm sick of your complaining, why don't you try to do it yourself? And I never did, because I worshipped conductors, the great ones, I used to, George Sell, people like that, oh man, But I said, all right, so maybe it's something I should think about. And at that time I was playing with Speculum Musicae. And there were occasions when we do larger pieces, required more of our instruments, than we had, and they needed a conductor. We needed so we would divide up conducting chores, and so I got to conduct a lot, and I really liked it. I felt like I was expanding my vocabulary, as it were. And then I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I better go study with somebody. So I studied with Leon Barzan, who conducted the National Orchestral Association. Not when I was there, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so I worked with him for a couple of years.
He was at an Aspen, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he was. And he was a guest at Aspen there, and he was wonderful. And then I guess word started getting around, okay, so, no big orchestral stuff yet, but some contemporary stuff. So I was like one of the people that got called to do contemporary stuff. And then, the forces got larger. I would get to do something larger. And then in 1976, we formed the American Composers Orchestra with Dennis Davies. And although I didn't conduct the orchestra then, in a couple of years, I was conducting, one of the concerts a year. And then, I wound up auditioning for a couple of places, and I was invited to conduct there, and it sort of grew. And
you still kept your flute career going at the same time.
Sure. I wasn't making enough money yet conducting.
Right.
But then we started the Westchester Philharmonic in Westchester. It's a long odyssey about how that orchestra began.
But you had 25 years there as
the
music director, and you did tremendous programming up there. I had the fortune of playing with the orchestra occasionally, and it was really quite a great orchestra of top New York freelance players, and with interesting programming. And so, did you during that period of time when you were really, the Westchester Philharmonic was yours and you were still playing full time, did that seem to fulfill your musical
I was
needs?
doing other things. I was I could conduct I was out in Denver. I was conducting a chamber orchestra out there. I conducted the opera at the Kennedy Center. But I was in that level of conductors who was not doing the major orchestras, which of course I dreamed of doing, but I knew that I, probably wasn't going to happen for me. But I was doing enough of interesting work that it was very fulfilling. But I always kept the New York City ballet job. I never gave that up.
Right.
One period of time I did early on in the late '60s. Tom took my job at the ballet, and I think he took my job, and then he had enough of it, and so then I went back.
He went back when he split.
Yeah, he could deal with it.
Right, but I guess one of the questions I had been thinking about asking you for a while, and you referenced one about Mariano's recording, Joe Mariano's recording of the Griffiths Tone Poem. What are some of your favorite flute recordings, players, and repertoire that you can share with the listeners?
Well, okay. So I always loved Jean-Pierre Rampal. I was a great fan of his because I thought he was so musical. He was like, every time he played, it pulsated. It was and it wasn't cheap. It wasn't cheap musicality. He never talked so much about, analyzing the music, but I know it was there because I could hear it. I could hear the great thought that went into it. So when you combine that, the joy that I always heard the joy.
passion that he had with his
I
playing.
always heard that. Plus, you know, it was smart playing and it was technically wonderful. So, you know, for me, he was top of the line still. I mean, there were other great French flute players too. But you know, the Telemann Suite for flute. It was
The A minor.
A minor suite, wonderful piece. Well, my favorite recording is by Papatsakis, who was
yeah,
in Boston.
yeah, we should tell people because he's no longer with us, but
Yeah.
well-respected player and teacher.
Yep,
Who
great
was up
teacher.
in New England, James Papasakis, and he was second flute in the Boston Symphony.
to Dorio Anthony Dwyer.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I always felt he was far the superior player. He was a master. There are other recordings of his that are terrific. There were fine, you know, of course, Kinkaid. Baker made great recordings. I mean, just, you know, impeccable playing. You know, intonation that can't be flawed, dynamics. You know, always very sweet playing. There wasn't a rough edge there. Sometimes you might have wanted one, a little bit for contrast, but for him, that's who he was. You know, it had to be beautiful.
Right.
You could not make you were not permitted to make a sound that wasn't beautiful.
Right. Now, you had an interesting relationship with Jimmy Galway because early on in your career, you entered a woodwind competition
Yeah.
in the city of Birmingham. It was an international woodwind competition, and you finished second. And the
Yeah.
guy who happened to finish first, and this competition sort of launched his solo career, was Jimmy Galway.
Sure.
Can you talk about Galway, your relationship with him, and you know?
Sure. Well, you know, it's like a long distance relationship. You know, and when he came to New York, we'd always get together, and we knew this was the Birmingham International Woodwind Competition. It was in 1966. So the European Woodwind sort of fellowship knew he was going to win. Not because it was rigged or anything like that. Not the competition, not, you know, but because he was that good, you know. And I didn't know who he was, you know. I don't believe I knew any of the other competitors. I think there might have been one other American. So, you know, I played, and then first round, and we went to look at they posted the results on a board, and my gosh, there was shrieking and screaming and cries of outrage. All the French flute players had been eliminated. And I had heard these guys play, and I couldn't believe it. On what grounds, you know, because I thought, you know, I didn't feel that comfortable, you know, but I moved on. And so anyway, I wound up finishing second to him, you know, which I thought, oh God. Then I heard him play, I realized, you know, why everybody thought he was going to win. You know, he was really, he was the real deal. And then we'd hung out together, you know, after I went to London. I spent some extra days in London. I met a flute player from London, or actually a piccolo player from, I think, Liverpool. All the flute players from England came to this competition. If they weren't playing, they came to see it. And so we hung out, and then he'd come to New York, and of course he's, you know, he's Galway. But I feel that he's pushed. I can't argue with success, and it's hard. He had a wonderful manager, but I think he should have been greater than he was, in a way.
I mean, given his abilities.
Yeah, you know, and also.
When you say greater than he was, meaning even more recognized,
Yes.
or that he
Yes.
should be more recognized than you.
Well, well, let me put it this, more recognized by me, because I thought this guy has no limitations in what he can do, but I felt that he cut some corners. But like I say, you can't. It's hard to argue with what he's achieved. In terms of people know him, and he's made a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah, but he's also revolutionized the flute world, and the whole. We were talking earlier about the contemporary flutes. They're all based. If you go back to where it really stems from his success and the fact that he played an Albert Cooper flute at one time, and that type of sound, that type of head joint construction, the scale, the changing of this Cooper scale. I mean, this all dates back to his success.
I guess, but I think there have been a lot of younger players who've tried to emulate him, want to sound like little Galways, and I'm not sure that has helped. And it's probably helped him a lot, but I don't think it's been very beneficial to the young players who want to imitate. Imitation is not the way to go when you're trying to develop yourself as a musician.
Who are the younger players that you've heard on record or in person that you feel have really touched you? Or you said, wow, this is something
I'm
special.
Pretty fond of the woman who plays first flute in Boston.
Elizabeth Rowe.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree. We have never talked about this, and that's funny. I mean, there is a new series of recordings of the Brahms symphonies that were recorded live in Symphony Hall. And both my wife Jean and I feel it's really the best we've ever heard flute recorded and sounding in the Brahms symphonies. That's so funny that you mentioned her.
I mean, listening to other orchestral flute players, every orchestra has a top-notch flute player. Chicago just hired Stefan Huskelson, who called me. And has been calling all other flute players who are working in New York looking for work, which is what you're supposed to do. And he showed up at my house up in Westchester, and came with his wife, pianist, very fine pianist, and they played, remember, Prokofiev Sonata, and I heard the whole thing. It was very enjoyable. And I said, stay here. When I went downstairs, my wife was downstairs, and I said, you hear that? She says, yeah. I said, I should be playing for him. And so,
And this is prior to him landing the job at the Met.
Yes.
And then now he's in Chicago.
And then Chicago, So he's, I'm very fond of him. But like I say, every orchestra, if you don't have a major flute player, somebody of depth, and something was wrong with the audition committee, because they're out there.
It's so many, and it's such a difference from 50, 60 years ago. Now the conservatories are churning out wonderful players who can play anything in the repertoire, and it's thrown in front of them, and it's another world. And like you say, perhaps there are more good flute players than any other wind instrument
without
today.
a doubt.
So it becomes really hard for a job. So what advice would you give, now this is for the flute players out there who, like you said, there are so many talented and wonderful players. What advice would you give them, given the fact that the industry today is radically different than the industry that you entered? There are fewer jobs and more people who are capable and talented. What can you say to them?
Well, to make a living where you can, if you're interested in supporting a family, if you're interested, the full experience of having children, and sending them to schools, and starting the cycle again, you're looking at an orchestral position somewhere. I mean, nobody sets out looking for a Broadway show. Nobody wants to play, Cats for 30 years of their lives.
That's Phantom. But it's the same thing.
Fat
What's the
Cats, Phantom, whatever. They're all, for me, all those shows are the same.
It becomes the same after about the first 2 or 3 weeks.
Of course.
Yeah.
And you're not, and the hardest thing about playing in a show, by the way, is keeping your standards up, your levels up, and there are people, I gotta say, they can do it. There's people who are doing it, but it's a struggle, and it's a mental struggle, and it's a struggle with the instrument.
Yeah, and you have to create your own interests outside.
But the world has changed, my world of classical music is nothing what it was, so what puts me in the position of giving advice to them, to somebody in like the brave new world of what isn't?
Yeah, it's very difficult, but like you said, if you want the full experience of life with a family and the whole deal, that requires a substantial income and a steady income with benefits, and that really then brings you back to, in most cases, an orchestral position.
Yeah, and we're seeing the orchestral vista shrink.
Right.
Orchestras like Philadelphia, who would have thought we were, a step away from bankruptcy.
Yeah. Well, you always have been involved with educational initiatives, whether as a teacher or when you were a conductor. You were actually given a Leonard Bernstein Award for your educational endeavors. What can be done? Is it too late, or is there something that can be done to help bring back an audience of people interested in classical music and orchestral music, opera, ballet? What can be done? Is there a solution that you see?
Well, if you go back to the 50s in this country, and you had a space race, it was Russia to get the first man on the moon, rocket ship supremacy, all that. So this country panicked when the Russians, sent out their first satellite. And so what that did was all of a sudden science and mathematics became very, very important in the schools. First of all, it became important for the government. And so now all of a sudden you have the government supporting education of science. They're pouring money into it like crazy.
Sure.
Now, there has to be a music crisis, an arts crisis, whatever crisis. I don't think so. And so we have to figure out, we in the industry, have tried to do things that would, working with schools, that would bolster their arts programs, because their arts programs were being decimated by, the local councils, the boards,
right,
who were saying, "Oh, it's not important. We've got to, And it's right now. I think it's in some districts. I find, you'll get somebody who has thought about it, and there'll be that one administrator who realizes that the arts are very important, and teaching people how to think, and it enhances. The good scientists, it seems, you find out, I played the violin, I did all the arts things.
The people who love the arts the most and who play, I have found scientists, doctors, they're in love with the arts.
Absolutely, and so I think as young kids, this has helped them progress through the educational, the swamp that is our educational system. So I always felt, if I'm going to head an orchestra in a pretty large, not in the city, but it was a metropolitan area.
Right.
I'm going to make sure that orchestra participates in educational programs with districts that we service.
Right. And when you were the head of the Westchester Philharmonic, if I remember, I did some initiatives outreach for you during that time, but I think you hit about over 70 schools in Westchester with the educational endeavors.
Actually, it was 70 districts.
70 districts?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was more than 70 schools.
Wow.
Yeah, we hit pretty much all of Westchester, Northern Bronx, Rockland County, Southern Connecticut.
Wow.
People, close enough.
But that's what's necessary for every orchestra to do that.
A lot of them do it. A lot of them, do it very well. But then you get, you know, a whole bunch of communities where there are no orchestras, you know, out in the far west, you know, southwest, you know, towns that they don't get the arts, they don't get it.
Right, and certainly mass media doesn't
No.
give us much PR and much time. So it really is dependent upon the musicians themselves, the conductors, to take the initiative, because we're not getting help, certainly from the government, not much.
It never was much.
Yeah, but now it's sort of a joke. And so it's really up to the musicians to push that concept.
Yep.
In order for survival. Now, in wrapping up our interview today, I just wanted to mention you are one of the musicians I know who has the most interests outside of music. You're a voracious reader. I mean, I don't know anybody who reads as much or has read as much as you do. You love sports.
But I remember nothing.
Well, that's also part of the fun of it sometimes. But you're a sports fanatic. Unfortunately, you're a New York Mets fan, so you're in mourning at this point. But and you're also in love with horses. You now are a horse owner in a different capacity. You own horses now besides betting on them. All of these different outside interests, do you find that if you look at the totality, that actually enhances your musicianship, that it helps you as a musician, or is that something you would recommend for others, having numerous outside interests like this?
Well, I don't know, you know, if my involvement in any of those activities enhances my performance or processes, but I'm always wary of people that, you know, bring their work back from the office, which, you know, there's a lot of musicians that's what they do. All they think about. I think and breathe music. You know, they say, I don't want to know about it. You know, I think and breathe something else occasionally. You know, because it's to me, you've got to do something else. You know, it's not you don't have to do what I do, but
right.
Just, you know, get another interest. It's just. It widens your perspective, you know. I find that the most boring people are the ones that only talk about music, and that includes some of the most significant artists of our day. You know,
right.
who are actually very intelligent, but their whole lives they've never been given the.
We were talking on the way up about Jascha Heifetz, but Heifetz himself was a incredibly interesting person. He was a phenomenal ping pong player, a tremendous cook. He was an excellent pianist and wrote pop tunes besides his concert. I mean, he was sort of a bon vivant. I mean, he knew a lot about a lot of different things.
Sure.
I mean, and that's maybe the greatest classical concert artist of the 20th century.
Probably.
You know, so I mean, I know from friends who knew John Coltrane that he had tremendous interests. Jimmy Heath once told me he went to Coltrane's apartment and on the floor were spread out books, 15, 20 books, all philosophy, sociology, numerics. I mean, he was interested in everything. So I have got to believe that, you know, an artist of the highest level has to, you know, have other things that's, you know,
curiosity.
Creating the, you know.
If you don't have curiosity, you know, it's got to be part of your life.
Right, and then that, you would think that would have to come through in the music on a certain level.
Or maybe not, you know, but I find it makes my life more fun. You know, and basically we're looking in our lives to enjoy ourselves, you know, and I think a person who's having a good time all around is going to produce something that's a more joyous experience for the audience.
Right. Well, thanks
Thank
for
you.
sharing, Paul. It's been great, and again, thank you on a personal level for all the, you know, help and support throughout my career, and it's really it's meant something to me a great deal, and really. Perhaps if I hadn't studied with you at the time when I was still in undergrad and college, I don't know if flute would have entered my life in the same way it has.
Good.
And,
I'm happy. I'm happy.
It meant a lot. So
It makes me happy to hear you say it. Thank you, Ed.
all right. And thank you for tuning in. Just want to let you know we'll have a great deal more interviews coming up this season, and our next interview will be with the clarinet virtuoso, jazz clarinet virtuoso, and multi-reed virtuoso, the great Eddie Daniels. So we hope you'll come back and check out that interview as well as others. Thank you.